I brought, somebody, I get a professional teacher, and I can get everybody's attention. He probably got some tricks up his sleeves. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to call the Springfield City Council to order and have Allison take roll.
Mayor Gordon.
Here.
Councillor Weber. Here. Councillor Mo.
Here.
Councillor Rodley. Here. Councillor Blackwell. Here. Councillor Doyle. Here. And Councillor Fishneri.
Here. I'll turn it over to William and so they can open their meeting.
Absolutely. I will call the Willamette Lane Board of Directors to order and roll call, sir.
Sure. President James here. Vice President Reinhardt is absent. Director Minshinger is absent. Director Mann.
Estoy aquí.
Director Wig.
Hi.
I will call the Springfield Public School Board of Directors to order.
Oh, I get to do roll call?
Sure.
Okay. Chair Mason,
Here.
Vice Chair DeGraff, Director Light. Here. Director Cole. Here. And Director Quazanza.
Here. Come on.
Here.
And I'll call the Springfield Utility Board to order. Director. Board member Don Winter.
Here.
Board member Bruce Weber.
Here.
I know that board chair David Willis is not with us. And is that it?
And Ryan Thomas is not here, board member Thomas.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Springfield, our semi-annual get together. I really appreciate everybody taking the time. This is our opportunity with elected officials in this community to just network. There's a lot of new faces around the table. And just share information between bodies that is frankly relevant to everybody. Before we turn it over to the CAOs, what I think we need to do is go around and just do a quick round of introductions. We're going to start with the CAOs and we're just going to work our way around the entire table. And then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mayor. Jeff Nelson, General Manager of Springfield Utility Board.
Todd Hamilton, Superintendent for Springfield Public Schools.
Nancy Newton, City Manager, City of Springfield.
Michael Wargo, Executive Director of Willamette Lane.
Corey Rodley, she, her pronouns, and I am the Ward 3 counselor for the Springfield City Council.
CJ Mann, Willamette Lane Board of Directors.
Beth Blackwell, Springfield City Councilor, Ward 4. Colby Brown, Vice Chair for the Springfield School Board.
Joe Pishneri, Springfield City Council, representing Ward 6, the Thurston area, and the city.
Barry Dillon, Vice Chair, Springfield Utility Board.
Chris Wig, Board Member, Willamette Lane Park and Recreation District.
Heather Costanza, Springfield Public School Board Member, position 2.
Bruce Weber, Springfield Utility Board, position 5.
Sean Van Horton, Mayor.
Ben Cole, Springfield School Board, position number 1.
Victoria Doyle, Ward 5 at Springfield Council.
Greg James, Willamette Lane Park and Recreation District Board President this year.
Steve O, City Council Board 2.
Kelly Mason, Board Chair for Springfield School Board.
John DeWinter, Springfield Utility Board, position 3.
Michelle Weber, Springfield City Council, Ward 1.
Jonathan Light, Springfield School Board 2.
Gotta keep going.
Okay. Digital Public Information Officer, City Manager's Office. Allison Polito, City Recorder.
We're gonna go clear back to the staff here.
Sanjeev King, Sub-Electric. Greg Miller, Subwater Division Director.
Tracy Sutton, Resource Planning Manager, Springfield Utility Board.
Kenny Wygant, Community Engagement Director for Willamette Lane.
Daniela Dottie, Assistant City Manager, City of Springfield.
Marty Steigletter, Springfield Schools. I work with Todd and the board.
Kelly Camp, City Springfield Economic Development Manager.
Ryan Richardson, Director of Communications, Springfield Public Schools.
Chris Eigner, Springfield GIS Architect.
Ken Vogany, City of Springfield, Emergency Manager.
Chris Johnson, Risk and Safety, Willamette Lane.
Bert Manser, Maintenance and Operations Program Manager, Willamette Lane.
Nicole Dalkey, Springfield Utility Board, Human Resources Manager.
Eric Adams, Planning, Parks and Facilities Director at Willamette Lane.
Thank you. I know that takes more than a minute, but it helps to start to put names to faces between the electeds and the staff that support us. I think we're ready to turn this over to the CAOs. So I don't know which one of you is taking it from here.
Sure, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all of our elected officials for joining us this evening. It's always an exciting time to talk with our partners in the city of Springfield. And I'm extremely proud of this partnership that we have with Team Springfield. When I talk to other city managers and describe the level of collaboration and the level of camaraderie that we all enjoy together, not just on our elected level, but also at the administrative level, they're jealous, quite frankly. You know, this is a very unique group and we are all very hands-on and we know how to do a lot with very little. And this evening, we are talking in that vein about how we can improve our emergency response, and each agency will be talking about that subject through the lens of I guess now almost a year ago, the ice storm. So that provided a lot of good lessons for all of us, and we've all individually been doing things to follow up, and now we are going to collectively discuss those follow-up efforts and then how we can merge and join those efforts. And I will turn that over to, she wants to start down with Jeff and then introduce Jeff.
Are you into your presentation?
I guess I could do my presentation. Okay.
We can go through it that way. So if we're ready to start with the city's presentation, we can definitely start there.
I'm going to actually ask Neil to come forward for a couple of reasons. One, embarrassingly, last year when this horrible ice event happened, I was already out of the country on vacation. I tried to go somewhere warm in January to make it through the dark Northwest winters. And so Neil Ladati was acting city manager at that time and really rose to an enormous challenge. And I came back toward the tail end and we were, working collaboratively, but that's why I wanted Neil to really take the lead on this presentation. He was here, he was living the worst of it, and he was, handling all the coordination on the city's side. So I certainly would not want to take credit for his excellent work. So that's why I'd like to turn this over to Neil, talk about what we're doing now.
Oh, great. Thanks, Nancy. I appreciate it. So good evening. Thanks everyone for being here and for your time as always. So we're going to talk a little bit about the city's response, but at a pretty high level, just to kind of give a understanding or a baseline of what was the city doing. And then Chris Seitner is here. He's a GIS architect. He's going to walk us through kind of one of the tools that came out of the number one piece of feedback that we got from the community, and something that we think will help all of Team Springfield and in turn the community as well. So we kind of just want to, and this might be hard to read, but there's not a lot. I'll talk to what's there. But for us, the ice storm really started on January 5th, which is several days before. We have an agenda review every Friday, and at that agenda review, council leadership, Council Piscinari, and Mayor Van Gordon started to talk to us about, hey, we're looking at our iPhones and it looks like it's going to get like to 6 degrees next week. What are you doing to prep for it? So that afternoon, we set up meetings with operations for Monday morning. We had that first initial meeting with operations to start planning for this ice storm. That was January 8th. January 11th, if you remember, all of the Team Springfield partners came together and put out information on the winter weather that was coming. So the community received something from Team Springfield saying, we think it's going to get cold and probably a ½ inch of ice. So make sure you have like water and things like that. But we didn't know what was coming. January 12th, Ken Bogany, who's our emergency manager, is at the back of the room there. Sent out an ice storm warning. Again, it was a ½ inch of ice, but we brought that to our full executive team. We had another meeting with our council leadership. We met with operations again. We met with the city of Eugene. We met with Lane County. So we were as prepared as could be. And at that time, operations had prepped the full winter fleet. So every vehicle we had that could do a fight against ice and snow was prepped and ready to go. And we were ready to staff. And then January 13th, the calendar turned and many of us were under City Hall that morning, realizing that we got something different on our hands than maybe a half inch of ice, and we're gonna need to start making some decisions. Before I get into that, I just wanted to kind of share something, because this is very personal for people. I mean, we were trying to do this work at the same time we were living it, and our neighbors were living it. And so I wanted to share, and he said this was okay to share, but I wanted to share a couple of texts from our council president on that day, on the 13th, at about noon. Councilor Pictionary texted and said, hey, if someone has questions about road hazards, who do they contact? And I provided the number. And then about 5:57, he's like, wow, all these trees are starting to fall. It's really bad out here. And then 6:30, he sent me a picture of the deck of his house. And he was like, this is more than a half inch of ice. It was an inch at that time. And then by 7:45, the trees had fallen on his house and he had to leave. So it was really, for us that were in it, it was more than just an event. It was a community issue. So on January 13, we organized the emergency operations plan. So that's the folks that are out in the street. They have an emergency plan that was put in place. They were already out working 24/7. On the 16th, we did the emergency declaration, which doesn't mean now we're going to work on emergency stuff, but it opens up opportunities for the city to receive money, to get more assistance. Within those few days, January 13th through the 19th, police responded to almost 1,500 calls. Typically, it's 600 in a week, 500 in a week. Fire responded to 1,341 calls. Over that same period, it was their top 4 busiest days in the history of the department. So I mentioned that because while we were kind of going through all this, people were working. So that's the expectation of the city, was get the streets open, get police and fire out there. And we had folks out there. Overwhelmed as we were by what was happening, they were still out there. At the same time, we had another crisis on our hands at City Hall, which was Egan Warming Center. So the Egan Warming Center was filled to the brim, more than 100 people in that building. And if you know how the Egan Warming Center works, they open in the evening, they close at 8 in the morning, and then at 8 in the morning, people will disperse. Oftentimes during the week, they come to City Hall. Well, City Hall was closed. The volunteers were at their limit. They couldn't keep the building open. And so we were making decisions about where do we put 100 people, 50 people. And a lot of times we were opening City Hall with a skeleton crew, probably 3 or 4 people, with 50 or 60 unhoused folks in City Hall, just because there was nowhere to go. But the hours that took and the work that our council was able to do and help us with, even though they were maybe not in their home. Councilor Pictionary was not the only councilor who lost a home during this. So the Egan was a piece of it. Wellness checks were another piece that started after the ice storm started to slow down. If you kind of remember, we had that Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday, there was this really short time where we were like, oh, things are going to turn around. Power's coming back on. We're doing Zoom meetings. And then I remember being in a Zoom meeting and my phone's just pinging as everything froze again, and it was worse than the first time. And that's when things really kind of went downhill. But we were doing wellness checks through SPD, through fire, through our elected officials walking, our City Hall staff. And we tried to include areas that were really hit hard, like Thurston, mobile home parks, senior communities, and then Sub was doing their best to provide us with areas that they thought, hey, we think there's going to be wellness checks needed here. So by the numbers, let's see if we can get this to, there we go. Just kind of focus on a couple of numbers and we can send this sheet out. But really the tree canopy in Springfield, like forever changed. During this event, we lost 20,000 trees. About a quarter, I think, of the entire tree canopy. The freeze earlier, I think 3 or 4 years earlier, we lost 10,000 or so in that. So, and then the number of hours from staff at around 6,600. These were a lot of staff coming in and doing jobs that, you know, they weren't trained to do. Accountants, getting in the van with the mayor and then driving him to a mobile home park that needed food box deliveries. So we had a really rough week. I think Friday was one of the roughest days for most people. But then Saturday, as things tend to do, it turned around a little bit. And we were able, with our partners in the county, to do a resource center at City Hall. And the resource center brought in just kind of an astronomical number, but over 4,000 people came through City Hall on that Saturday, Sunday, Monday. All sorts of volunteers. The county was there en masse with volunteers, with food boxes, with firewood. And the amount of grace shown by the Springfield residents, just incredible. Because of what they were going through, they still showed up. They were very positive, and we learned a lot during that time. We learned what we needed to do better. See, it seemed like people were happy with fire. They understood the challenges around operations. They understood what, SPD was doing what they could. But the area where we had a little bit of a blind spot as a city was understanding that the city of Springfield is a lot different based on where you're at. And so people in different areas of Springfield were experiencing this in a different way. And we had a one-size-fits-all message. And that worked for some people. I live by Kingsford plant. I lost power for a couple of days. I was able to drive into work, drive home. But for most people, they were stuck and scared, and they needed a different level of assistance. And so that's where Chris will come in. We put together, just with the feedback that we received, an app that we're calling Sarah Springfield Emergency Response App. And it answers the main question we got from folks, which is, if I am experiencing this differently, why don't you know more about where I live and what my needs are? And so Chris is going to walk you through a tool that we think helps us do that for a real emergency or minor emergency. And there's also opportunities for our partners in Team Springfield to participate. So,
Let me pull this up here.
before you go on, Chris was the lead from GIS, but we had a group of people throughout the city, like 10 or 12, that helped us kind of figure out all of these questions and how do we answer them. It's okay.
New to Zoom. Yeah, so as Neil discussed, this application was born out of what we were hearing from community members, the things they weren't quite understanding about the storm and how they could get information or convey their experience back to the city and how we can convey our experience out to them. So we put together Sarah, which is not necessarily an application, it's a combination of applications to serve. We have an emergency manager application, which is kind of the back end EOC, Ken Vogany-ish, data involvement side of things. A couple of dashboards that will help convey messaging out to the public. A wellness check application that allows us to actually inventory, I guess is the best term for it, each individual house and figure out what their needs are. So when they come in to collect things, we can actually determine, yes, the house at 1335 Mill came in and got their wood and their food and their water, and we're good to go. And I'll walk through all these so you guys have an idea of what we're doing.
And we'll be brief. We understand there's a lot.
So we'll go through the emergency manager side first. It's kind of the gateway to everything. Very high level mapping application can plot storm incidents and areas that we need to focus on. For this example, we have Thurston Hills is our sample area. Inside of this area, we're going to have a wellness check area, which we can define on the fly. It'll run a process to go out and pull all those addresses in and then deliver them out to our wellness check application, which volunteers can then go out and begin that inventory.
We have an understanding section, which basically is kind of a demographic profile of different areas in the city. So we can select any boundary, in this case, our wellness check boundary. It's gonna go out and pull basically an infographic about that area and return it back. So this can easily be exported out, handed to council or, other volunteers, and get an idea of what's the population, what are the things we're dealing with inside this boundary. Again, that can be expanded out into council wards, can be done citywide. City.
Yeah, and Chris, if I can add, one of the challenges we found is when we were sending folks up to Thurston or to a mobile home park, we didn't quite know how many people were there or what streets we were talking about. We couldn't get up there. So this allows us to kind of have a bird's eye view and understand who's there and maybe what they need, even though we can't be there.
And this data here is kind of like census level data, so it's not real precise, but it's a high level overview. This infrastructure tab is more of a detailed view of what we have internally for data. And this way we can look at who are the tax lot owners in that area, so we can have a real idea of who we're speaking to. Part of this process will be hopefully developing a neighborhood contact list. So as events happen, we can have a point of contact that we can reach out to and get them involved at the very beginning and start feeding information back. Last tab is really another EOC level thing where we can start conveying roadblocks and regulations and everything else that we can then get out to the public. All of this kind of rolls into this incident status dashboard, which at a high level is really that, like, what is going on? How many things do we have going on? Disregard this, there we go. So we have 3 weather storm watches right now, probably fog, ice, something else. In this case, we have 2 evacuations. These are fake. We don't really have any evacuations going on. But the wellness check tab in this case is really the meat of this. So this is going to be a real-time tabulation of that wellness check survey we're running. So anybody who's looking at this can understand we've got 178 wellness checks that are out there. Of the ones that we've completed so far, here are the needs. And any of these, we can click on them and say, here are the addresses that need firewood. Here are the addresses that need firewood and propane. Or just here are the addresses that need propane. So all these are dynamic, allows us to get an idea of where we need to be, who we need to be contacting. This is really a Ken thing. So FEMA lifeline conditions really just shows us how we're navigating the event. Where do we stand on these metrics? Past conditions to show how we. The last one is the wellness check application that I've been speaking about. So a very simple application that can be run on anybody's laptop, iPad, phone, whatever. Whoever has a login to this can go out and do a wellness check in their neighborhood. Somebody simply selects an address, going to give them what's needed. This one has no items needed anymore, what's been delivered. And then they can edit all of this information. So basically going through and just inventorying every house and figuring out what these neighborhoods need so we can get it to them in an efficient way. That's really the quick as possible explanation as I can give you on this one.
So basically how it might work is Councilor Doyle, who was very active during this, might call our office and say, what's going on in my area? And we would be able to pull up this information and say, here's what we know. Here are your contacts if you want to try to call them and get more information. These are the challenging homes and here's what they typically need. They need propane and we're going to bring up some water. But that's kind of how it would work for all the counselors. And then if our partners need assistance as well, we can do that. So any questions? Again, we're trying to be real brief, but there's a lot in there. Yes.
I'm sure we'll get to it, but with people had no power, but they also had no cell service and they had no internet. So are we going to address that sort of situation? Or there was no way for us to know anything those
That's
first
what-
4 days.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're hoping to do, is really have that understanding of these problematic neighborhoods. Not that they're problems, but during a storm they are.
Yeah.
And so we might know when, like, Police Chief Shearer and our fire marshal were just kind of trudging up to Ivy Street. They didn't really know what they were gonna find. Now, when they go up, not only will they know, they'll have materials like propane, and we'll know what they need. And then they can also do wellness checks, and they'll know who's in these particular houses. So even if they have no power, we'd still be able to get to them and at least know who they are and what they might need.
Right, so two of the metrics in that survey are, do they have cell phone or internet? Do they have power? So we can start to build out neighborhoods that we may need to focus on.
I assume this application is run on a system that has an uninterruptible power supply or some power source that will keep it active.
This is hosted remotely, yes, it's not hosted here in the city.
Although I want to add to that question because this is intended to be used during an emergency as part of the incident command structure in the EOC. So the room we're sitting in right now is the city's emergency operations center. This is where we would be deploying that. So this building has obviously backup generator power, all of the things that we would need to keep that, keep the app going.
All right, are there other questions before we let the utility board go? Thanks for the city.
My turn, Mayor.
It is your turn.
All right, thank you, Mayor.
It is your turn.
So we provided some materials in the packet.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask that everybody speak up. I'm getting a lot of, people back here going, we can't quite hear.
There's no chance that there's a microphone.
We had one. There's supposed to be a microphone.
I'll project better that way. All right, I'll project better this way. Thank you, Mayor. There are a few items in the, that were provided to you as part of our review of the storm response, did an internal after action report and an external after action report. So what is an after action report? So quickly, we follow what's called the Federal Emergency Management Agency's protocols for evaluating what went well and what didn't in an event, and then that is compiled into this after action report. So the internal after action report primarily focused on input from a variety of stakeholders, including staff, mostly non-supervisory staff, and then some external, and we also had customer feedback in there. And then the board also wanted to have an external after action report, and that was conducted by Haggerty Consulting Group. So that was another tool for us to evaluate this an outside set of eyes, doing an assessment of subs response and subs functions. So these documents are not Team Springfield focused documents. These are just for sub. But we wanted to share that with the group because there's some pretty blunt and raw observations in these reports. And we're processing those, and we're going to grow and learn from these. So we just wanted to let you know about how that process is going. And if you have questions on that, we can talk about that. Real briefly, though, I do have a presentation. We did have mutual aid partners that came. So some of them were contract crews that are basically storm chasers around the country. And one of them made that observation that they have seen this before after a hurricane. And so it was just a different perspective because we had mutual aid crews that came from within the region. And they said, I've never seen anything like this before, but others that had come and seen other destructive events just had a different perspective. Next slide. Oh, thank you. So one of the things that I appreciate Neil flagging what happened before the 13th. So Springfield Utility Board is part of the utility functions of the emergency support functions within incident command. We are part of different groups, largely around mutual aid with utilities. And the Oregon Public Utility Commission has the role of standing up meetings prior to large potential events. And so prior to the ice storm, they had set up meetings, I want to say 2 weeks before, and they were meeting regularly, and we were engaged in those conversations. So they had Portland's National Weather Service personnel giving us forecasts and kind of sharing how they were positioning themselves, and then just kind of getting in a warm, ready mode for the event. I want to say the Friday before the event on the 12th, I sent an email out to the board saying, looks like we may get ice, but most of the weather system appears to be to the north and west of us. And of course, that didn't happen. But that was one of the gaps that I think we identified. Representative Val Boyle also identified. You may all be aware that this particular area may not have as much weather system information. So the monitoring stations used by the Northwest or the National Weather Service, there may be some data gaps here. So that was one area that we don't have control over in terms of weather forecasting, but filling that gap may give us better accurate information so that we know kind of with more certainty what's happening. So quickly on the timeline, we declared our emergency declaration on that Saturday when the event occurred. And when we talk about emergency declaration, this is SUB's internal declaration. So just to recap, when there's an event of a large scale, we fall underneath with our emergency support functions with utilities, underneath either the city's emergency operations center or the county's emergency operations center. And we were reporting to those as the event kind of progressed through time. And so that was one of the things I think SUB will do better next time in terms of notifying our partners. Hey, SUB's declared an emergency declaration, because we don't do that very often. And to some degree, we can be adding that information to our Team Springfield partners about just the magnitude of the event that we're experiencing on the utility scale. So on the Sunday, we said customers should plan to be without power for an extended period that may last several days. On Wednesday, we updated the community saying that to be planning to be without power for more than a week. So that was the Wednesday after the event started. And then Thursday, January 25th, we talked about expecting to have power back to folks by the weekend. So in terms of restoration, based on what we were doing and what we were observing other utilities experiencing locally, it seemed like we all kind of crossed that finish line in terms of the first phase of restoration around the same time, but it was a challenge for many utilities. Real quickly, these are just comparisons of what happened in this event relative to a 2014. Won't go through all of those, but this was a significant infrastructure impact. Talked about the after action process. I'm skipping way ahead. We can go back if you have questions. Learning from the experience, we launched an interactive boil water map. Changed the processes around billing, so we've changed our billing estimation a little bit. We added some online reporting functionality so people can self-report an outage on the website as opposed to calling in if they're having challenges getting through to our phone system. We have coordinated with other utilities on emergency preparedness. So we've done that in the past, and we've done that again this year. One of the things that we identified for feedback from staff was there just didn't seem to be an understanding of why we were doing what we were doing and what we were focusing on. So as part of that process, then we had all of the staff be trained in the first two trainings on Federal Emergency Management Agency incident command structure. So trying to get organizational understanding, so everyone's using common terms when we're talking about emergency disaster response. Those are a few highlights. Then information sharing, there's some things that we're focused on now. Reaching out to Lane County, we Lane Alerts, we tried to see what leverage we could use to use that system to communicate to the public. We're wanting to share information with our Team Springfield partners because we just want to make sure that going forward, we can understand what our role, what sub's role is going to be and what everyone else's role is going to be so that there just can be a clear expectation of what the public and who they should contact based on what their needs are. Map sharing. So Sarah, great app. We've been sharing our maps of sub's electric system. And the goal, one of the goals that we have is the city's identified neighborhoods. We want to use similar terminology. So when sub's talking about an area and the city's talking about an area, we're using the same terminology. So we're wanting to share information in that respect. And I do want to highlight that the Wednesday after the event, so our team meets every week with some exceptions, but that Wednesday when we met, I reached out to the group and I asked for help because we had a number of mutual aid crews arriving or on the way, and we needed a larger facility to house and deploy those crews. And so everyone stepped in and leaned in and kind of offered solutions. So I want to recognize everyone for that. We ended up going with the Bob Kiefer Center at Willamette, but I was grateful for everyone kind of letting us have access to resources to help us get the resources that we need to, because we brought in mutual aid. This is the first time I remember having sub asking for mutual aid from outside parties come in with restoration. And so anyway, it was a big lift and we're happy for that, all that support. I'm gonna talk about the well water notice briefly. So we submitted for a FEMA grant for backup generation at the Willamette well field and at the electric service center and the water service center. That was in 2022. That grant still has not given, we still don't have the green light for that grant. We've got yellow lights through the way, but we're optimistic that we'll get final approval, but that was a gap in terms of maybe the timing. We identified a need, but we just didn't get the money in time from that grant structure to fully implement that. So we're engaging with the sub board in terms of next steps. At a certain point, we may just say, we need to move forward with the solution without the FEMA funding for that backup generation. But we are optimistic, but it was one area that we really could have used that FEMA grant before this event. Probably would have avoided that boil water notice because the challenge was that the Willamette treatment plant didn't have power. We weren't able to provide water into the system. The reservoir levels were dropping. And then the pressure around the system got lowered to a point where we needed to send out a boil water notice. So that's where things are at with regards to the backup generation. Skipped over a lot. I'll just turn it over to those people have questions.
You folks have questions?
I have a question. I just want to offer appreciation because I know, and we've been talking about it over here, like this was a really hard time for all of us. It has brought it all back up. And I just remember just the pressure that sub was in. And a lot of the conversations we'd had afterwards, and I remember people coming to council meetings, and one of the things we all said is that we were gonna lean in and try to figure it out. And when I was reading through this, I was just like, I really appreciate how hard sub leaned into it. And by getting extra consulting to just really look at the situation so that we can deal in facts as opposed to like in the moment, we were all very emotional. So dealing with facts. And I really appreciate that because I think that just shows some of the sort of gritty strength of Springfield is that we're not afraid to like look at where things go awry and figure out how we do it better. So I want to just thank the board and I want to thank you all for just leading it so hard. So thank you.
Anybody else? Well, I've got, I guess, a couple of comments, and I want to preface this with saying that, like, your crews on the ground were doing an absolute fantastic job, and the amount of work, even from folks that were outside of the area that they were doing, was absolutely fantastic. I've got some pretty, I guess, direct questions about some of the material I read. But I think you brought up the big thing, oil water notice. And I know you guys put in a piece to sort of correct that. But I don't think the single event where people wanted to give up, right, in the city was when the boil water notice walked out, right? Because it would just hit us at that moment when we've been out of power, we've been holding it together. And the uncertainty and the panic that created, and I know you guys have heard this, but I think it's, important that we say it too, right? Like, that can't happen again. And I know you guys as a board are working on correcting it, and I appreciate how open you guys have been to it, but it did create a lot of panic in the city. And right, that's just a place we have to clearly do better. I had people that were not impacted, just weren't sure what to do, right? So I can't emphasize the amount of damage that single event did in the, and then to read that there was just other issues, right? And, in all the reports, the boil water notice comes up with just other problems associated with it. So I'm glad you see it. I'm glad you guys are responding to it, but it was a big deal. On your slide, you use the term customer understanding subs outage reporting system. And when I read that, as a customer, I was a little bent out of shape about that, right? Because going through this whole thing, it isn't it isn't up to the customers to really have to understand what you're doing today. I would have expected it to come back and say that, hey, we're gonna modernize it, we're gonna invest in it, we're gonna make it easier to understand, opposed to when I read it, it sounded like, hey, I have to go out of my way to understand what subs internal workforce or what subs internal processes are. And I just think it's a point that the pivot I'm looking for is to sort of move away from, hey, you have to understand how we do business, opposed to you're here to serve this community. I thought your internal report, fantastic. I thought it was open, I thought it was crisp. I thought it was, pointed where the places were needed to. I had a couple questions about this report. An example, when I read it, Councilor Pictionary and I were interviewed, but we're not noted in the back of the report is being interviewed. And then can you help me understand the scope of work in a sense that, as far as I know, I don't think the city manager or assistant city manager were interviewed in this, right? But as far as an emergency management, exercise, right? Their role is really important. And I felt like the report had a lot of questions about the city, but sort of missed the broader conversation around like, hey, are we interviewing the right people at the city to allow us to collect the right information?
So, to piggyback on what Mayor was saying is, for example, when in the neighborhood I was at got hit really hard. And so there was, borderline, I don't know if I use the word panic, but there was the feeling of vulnerability and not able to do anything about it. The citizens are in that position, and I'm not going to decide myself and family, but the whole neighborhood are scared to death. You hear trees coming down. You see, we don't have any fire people here, do we? When you see an ambulance come up the street and then go down the street sideways, wondering how much that person needed that help. You couldn't get it. So that's kind of, I mean, it's just scary and bad. You see telephone poles going down, trees going down, and then you have this boil water notice. Say, folks, you gotta boil your water. When we haven't had electricity for days, some of us without water, some of us internal house temperatures of 28 degrees, and being told, oh, boil your water. The only thing we could do is heat up freeze-dried food, if that. So you would expect, my question was, at the time, was, where's our freshwater trucks? There's gotta be water trucks. Even at the National Guard Center, should be some water trucks, but none of that type of discussion was out there. And on social media, when you got a page that's got 4,000 followers, and they're asking these questions, and that's why when I texted Neil, there's,
Back here someplace.
who's got these answers? How can I direct these people to the answers when that information was lacking? And so it was, people were panicking, people were getting hurt and properties being destroyed. And the support felt as though it was very, very substandard. To my surprise, I would have thought that the support would have been at a much higher level. And so from this point forward, that's what my expectation would be from all the agencies, to have the people have an expectation and a right to have a high level of support from these agencies, and that wasn't felt. So that, a lot of room to grow. But I know that everybody, the thing is, everybody had their hearts were in the right spot. I know that, but it just need to get the pieces put together.
So Jeff, do you want to respond to some of that, or do you want me to give you the other questions I've got?
Oh, go ahead and give me other questions. I want to hear them.
So on page 13, there reads a sub in the city of Springfield had differing understandings of their roles and responsibility following an event of this magnitude. And I guess my question is, tell me more here, because I think this could be one or two things, right? And I would be curious what it was referring to.
Well, I think, as Neil kind of pointed out, we all experienced the ice storm, but we had different experiences, even amongst agencies. And so, one of the things that we experienced were, and this, to your point, just going back a little bit in terms of getting engagement with all of the right stakeholders and getting feedback. I think part of the interest that we had with Haggerty is they had tried to, I think, set up some meetings and open up opportunities, but not all of those opportunities were available, and they had a timeline and they needed to wrap that up. But we do plan to have more conversations. So, but with regards to differing understandings, I think that what we were getting with the volume of customer calls, folks were inquiring about their power status, but they're also inquiring about other non-restoration issues. So it was the humanitarian items that people were flagging in terms of wanting to know more information. And so we were needing to direct them to resources. And so that's another area I think that we just need to understand a little bit more in terms of what is that bandwidth for the community to, because we had a call center, but we didn't know how other agencies were handling the volume of calls, because our call center, even though we had a number of phone lines, that was pushed to the limit and beyond. And I'm sure other agencies had that same experience. So the issue there, I think, was, the community wasn't clear on where they could go. And I think there's pieces in place to address that now and the resiliency centers and those types of things. So, but we were wanting to communicate to the city, and we did through the situation reports through the Emergency Operations Center about what we were hearing from the customers on the humanitarian side of things. So we were wanting to just relay that information, and we didn't have the ability to activate certain things. And I think that was an area that it was unclear for us who could activate resources, and I think that's an area that we can just further explore in terms of having some of those things be fully understood in terms of when will certain resources be activated.
Go ahead.
I have a follow-up to that. It's easier to see how we'll be collaborate. I think, I appreciate that question, and I think you and I chatted about that too. And this is another opportunity to look at this from the lens of the residents. Because, and you know, just in full transparency, I've spent my life working in human services, so it's like, I don't want folks to have to call 17 people, is the thing. So however we strengthen the communication and the collaboration and the relationship and figure this piece out about who does what, it'd be great if everyone knew, or we had one center, so if folks call and are like, my power's out and I need blah, 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 they don't have to make 17 calls, that is the thing. So that's where I'm thinking about, however we move forward, to just keep looking at it, and I think that Councilor Kushner sort of put that out. How do we look at this from the point of view of the customer, of the resident, of our neighbors, and kind of get ourselves out of a like, this is our silo and this is what we do and we're providing these services, and think, okay, if we're gonna really lean in hard to doing really good emergency management, how are people gonna experience that? And how are we gonna make it as low barrier as possible?
Try to pass it down. Look, it's a team building exercise.
Telephone. Let's say one word.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Jeff. That's how I read it. And I guess one of the points that I want to make sure, and I'm hoping the other boards will, share the same commitment, is I think the CEOs need to hear us say that like the issue around whose role and responsibility things are, right, between all the agencies has to get sorted out. Like it cannot wait till the end of this water system. It can't, we can't have a place where we're trying to recover or respond to an emergency and then we're not sure who's on first. And I think, I think that if you guys can get this sorted out in a place that is just put to bed, if it's an MOU or it's a conversation, I don't care how we document it, but that's gotta get resolved. That is a big issue. And then I think the other thing that when I talk to your board many times about this, that I just wanted to reiterate so that we all heard it, right? Like the emergency response system is designed to deal with the humanitarian affairs. And I know you just gave a really interesting answer about, hey, we have to figure out how to get our people's issues to the emergency response folks. But the best thing the utility board can do is get the power turned back on. And I want to make sure you guys hear all of us, like me say that, is in an emergency like that, again, anything that takes you away from turning the power on and the water on, right? Like that's what the utility board really, that's their core mission. And I think it's really important that we allow you guys to focus. And I think Corey and Joe both brought up some really, really good points, which is we all act as intake points. I got 5, phone calls from back east, people looking forward to check on their relatives, right? So we have to create a system that there's no wrong door, but also as agencies has the ability for something that would land in the city and then get referred out to a land lane as far as the responding agency. And I know that a lot of this conversation is leading towards that. I think those are all my questions, so please take that one away. And the roles and responsibility thing is a big deal to me. else? Sure.
So, do you guys have a method that you speak to each other as the directors and the city managers in a situation like this? Because that's one of the things I was wondering about, was the communication between basically the 4 or 5 of you guys, that you could then get that information out to us that are being hammered with the calls and the neighbors knocking on the door. And so I didn't know if that's a regular thing, and if not, and I love the idea that you're talking about having the same language. I've been through that ICS 700 and training. I think everyone should take it, because you really learn that chain of command, and that's where things get confusing, is if we don't follow that chain of command. So my first question would be, do you guys have that? Would you be willing to set that up? Because I don't know that we were communicating with you as well as we should have, or.
Ever since COVID, we meet every Wednesday at 10 o'clock on a virtual meeting with the 4 of us, as well as our chief information officers. And then as needed, so in this case, we actually had another meeting like, hey, we should probably just get together. How can we support each other? So that mechanism is in place and then happens on a weekly basis.
Did that happen during the storm on the
Yes.
13th, 14th, or 15th?
Well, until we lost power
Oh.
and we couldn't do it, obviously, but we did have that meeting when Jeff kind of put out the call for help. And then that was one of our big responses. Spoiler alert to my presentation is, couldn't agree with the mayor more. Nothing is more important than getting the power on. So what can your park district do? Here's a building, here's a parking lot. Do whatever you need to just take it over, sub, and get the power back on for our community.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I'll add to that is when we activated our incident command team, we have one person who's designated to be at the emergency operations center, whether that's here in Springfield or in Lake County. And so they're the point of contact with the larger conversation that's happening, coming back to us. And then we're relaying that information out as we get it.
So ideally, in an ideal world, this would, requests for assistance, mutual aid, those types of things would be routed through the incident command structure within the EOC. And I love that Ken Bogan is nodding his head that I'm answering this right. So that's how we document requests. That's how we document all of the things that happen during an event. So that's the overarching structure that is used. And so my commitment to this group is to add that ICS training for every city employee as part of our basic training. Is the same that we do, say, sexual harassment or anything else, right? It should be just a baseline standard training. So that's one thing that I'm going to be talking about with our HR department. And in addition to that, we all have each other's cell numbers. Any of these friends, I would call them, can call me day or night, anytime. I'm gonna be on the phone. That happened with Todd and I one time, on an unrelated thing. So, that's why I sleep next to my phone. And that's why that's why I kind of operate the way I do. And we all kind of know that about each other. So external to the thing we have set up every week, we also do more as we need it if a situation arises. And then on top of that, we call and are in contact with each other very frequently.
So my answer is no. And I'll be blunt about that. I think everything that was raised is right on. But in terms of in a large outage event, do we have a formal structure where we ramp up and activate more active engagement on a daily basis? No, we kind of leaned on the protocols that we had in place, and they worked. But could they be better? Maybe we do need to have daily updates amongst ourselves so that we're kind of collectively sharing what's going on. So we can explore that.
Shout or be patient. Thanks, Allison, for.
Yeah, and I appreciate that answer, and I think, through the ICS system, you have a communications team that has a point person for each type of agency, so that way the lead person is not bogged down with the time it takes to communicate. So I think that if that's, we have further, and they have, so that communication, I think, occurs, and I think it did occur to some degree, but it probably could be polished up. What, the other part I wanted to bring up, and I can't remember which meeting we were at, one of the meetings, is that I think as agencies, here we are, Team Springfield, and each agency is separate and distinct from the other, but we're all still in one town. And I think we all have resources that are available or can make resources available without putting the burden on each person, each agency or each entity, such as, okay, water. So if you get water trucks, then maybe the city can look at, oh, tracked vehicles to be able to get up and down the hills. And the school district can look at, okay, where can we distribute some of these resources? Let's use our properties. So I think that kind of planning, combining resources, combining expenses would be a really smart thing to do and not put a huge burden on each and every single entity financially. So, and I did see you have procurement is set up for the next budget for you guys for water trucks. I saw that. I saw the potential for assisting homeowners at no cost loans for generators and switches. Those are all great ideas, but I think that, you know, we can do more cumulatively and offer more resources in this type of a situation.
Right, I'll send it to Michelle.
You to try to catch that.
First, I want to share Roy's appreciation that you haven't shied away from leaning in to being, you know, kind of put through the ringer here. And just, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And to hear all of the comments that are being made, the questions that are being asked. And I just want to show that appreciation. The second thing I've always, you know, just kind of, this question has been in my mind since January, and I'm hearing a little bit of it again tonight. Like, we know communication needs to be better from every agency. I mean, that's not just focused on one. But how do we reach the folks that just don't have the access to the information? Right? I think we need to really be thinking about how to solve for that. And I know we're working through some different things, but there's a community of folks out there that just don't have internet access. They don't have cell phones. I think of my father-in-law, who's no longer here, but there's no way that we would have been able to, you know, communicate with him without just physically going to him and knowing that he needed that help. So that's just a huge gap. And I just really, you know, we need to find a way to fix that one.
Okay, respond that really quickly. I think that we could use our Sarah app for that, because we can identify vulnerabilities and gaps by address, you know, using assessor records. And also we can do mapping by area as far as what are assets in that area. So if we know of a person, kind of that point person in the neighborhood that everybody knows, you can actually, you know, pin that and say, okay, this is somebody, this is your contact for this neighborhood. When I worked in Clackamas County, I did a lot of emergency management, and I knew exactly the person in Malala who you have to call to take the sand trucks out to the one area the whole neighborhood knows to get the sand. So that's the kind of thing you're talking about, is who are those people in the neighborhoods that we know that we can get those messages out to reach people that may not have conventional ways to, you know, like either for cell phone, internet, wherever those gaps may be. And you can also do GIS mapping on who has internet connection. I did a lot of that doing census work to identify people that are maybe underserved because they don't have internet access. It's a pretty easy GIS thing to do.
But the deeper question is for those folks who do ordinarily have those services, cell phones and that kind of thing, and computers. And when the power goes down and the towers go down, how are we going to reach those people? I think we're also pretty fortunate from the standpoint of this is a pretty localized event. And there's a very real possibility that future events of this nature or even any other nature might be more widespread. Because we had a lot of service trucks coming in our area that were from Utah or Colorado. So, you know, thinking bigger picture, unless you're of the opinion that this is one and done and we won't ever see another ice storm, what would it be if it was twice as big? Or what if it went from Portland down to Cottage Grove? So I see this as actually quite an opportunity to have these thoughtful conversations with the boards and councils and the CEOs. How do we move forward and jointly, so we're not duplicating effort? How do we make it work so when we have another event, then we can really communicate? The biggest problem from our standpoint was there was no cells, there was no communication. In the CV Loop area, the neighbors are very widely dispersed and getting around was a problem. So how would we reach the ordinarily people who can't communicate that all of a sudden can't? Is that misinformation? When people don't have the right information, they're gonna make up stories. They're really to our benefits.
So I'm gonna tag in Neil Ladati here, who's got a partial answer. And then we'll go to Corey. This is the conversation I think we were all looking for, so I appreciate everybody kind of engaging in it.
You know, this conversation is reminding us something I neglected to mention. So part of our response is an AM radio station for Springfield. So we're working on that through our emergency management. And so that would be a radio station that year round is active and tells people to come back here in an emergency, and then allows us the ability to provide regular updates. Because most people would still maybe have access to their radios. So we're working through that right now. And that would be available for all Team Springfield. Good idea.
Heather's hand up, so I don't know if Heather wants to go for it. No?
I'm good.
You're sure?
Nancy actually said what I was gonna say, so.
I did not want to step in front of you. Thank you.
And it may sound like a broken record, that's, y'all can throw shit at me, but I really appreciate Councilor Weber, like, taking us into this conversation, because I know we were all wanting to get to talk about communication. I think one of the things that's gonna be important is that there's not gonna be one answer. And I appreciate us thinking about neighborhoods and where people live, but I think we also need to think about all of the layers of communities that live in our community. When we were working, and I'm looking at Councilor Weber because we were both there that day, we were working at the, whatever it was that the county put on, and FEMA was there, and I was helping to check people in, and I was asking, but I was having conversations with people, and there's a lot of informal networks. I mean, how quickly people found out that there was firewood and were able to share that information and get down to City Hall. Like, if somebody can study that and understand that within communities, within, within the unhoused community, within certain, maybe it's a neighborhood, but maybe it's also like a preschool and a parent group and a high school, that there are communities within communities that different communication is gonna work. And I know it's gonna take some time, but I think it's gonna be an important thing for us to understand is just the nuances of Springfield. And it's not necessarily through a cell phone or through social media or anything like that. There's gonna be different ways that people hear.
So I'm gonna take a minute and try to get us back on track as far as, because we still have two other agencies that have information that they want to share. I think this is. See, I was trying to get done before you.
I think this is a great conversation. This is where we wanted to get to. I don't want to take away the additional time that both Emily and the schools have additional things to add for this conversation. So if we can, I didn't follow the list the first time. I was not supposed to go to sub. I noticed that I threw the curveball at you guys. I think it's Paul Emily or it's supposed to be next. We'll be in charge in December.
So first of all, I appreciate that you acknowledge that there's a teacher in the house, because there are a couple of them in here. And one of the things that we recognize and know is that when you've been sitting for an hour, if the bum is numb, the brain is the same. So while I'm going back to get my notes, if you want to stand and do some toe raisers, that gets the blood flowing back up to the brain again. If you want to just wiggle your feet at your desk, please feel free to do that. This also gives Allison a minute to find our slide deck.
Pretty much that way all the time.
Joe Missionary. How's it going?
All right, let's find your way back to your seats.
In your house. That's awesome. Well, that's still a major accomplishment. So when I first heard about that, I thought of when I was, say, 6 or 7. It's only one of those, and that my memory of that was for my birthday that year. Dad did the turn. They have. When I heard about
Whatever amount of time.
thinking about how in that time, how, you know.
Whatever time
Scared.
I think be there at 9 or there later.
Okay.
Can't watch the video.
Stressful, that I never thought. I think of that as a fun story. I'm like, you know, my step is over, whatever. I know, but it's.
If we get out in time, I'm gonna go. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't live here.
That's clear, actually, for. I just have to.
That's yours.
Yeah, no.
So thank you for humoring the teacher that still lives deep within my heart. I appreciate that. Just seeing you stand up and do the toe raises, the energy in the room was better. So I'm hopeful that we'll be ending on a high note tonight with good energy and even more questions later as we go. So I'm pleased to be here to represent Springfield Public Schools and have a conversation with you tonight about what we learned. And one of the things that is unfortunately we've gotten good at we have visuals for you. In addition to teaching and learning, which is really our focus, it's almost unfortunate that we've gotten good at it. And that's responding to events of incidents like this. So this is my 6th year in Springfield. My first year, we dealt with the pandemic. When we started welcoming kids back to school, we dealt with fires. And now we dealt with an ice storm. And in each of these events, one of the things that we kept in mind first was health and safety. So when we think about weather events in our schools, we're thinking about health and safety for getting students and staff to schools. And that was the first thing that happened for us on the ice storm. And, you know, Beth, you probably saw Mike leave in the ice storm to go drive around to our schools, check roads, to see what the conditions were like. Because for us, we kind of had hopes that this would be a short-lived event. And so we were trying to figure out on this holiday weekend, because we didn't have students scheduled to come to school on Monday, we were trying to figure out what did we need to do to be prepared for their return on Tuesday. And so our crews were out driving the roads, checking the walking routes as the weekend progressed. And on Monday morning, I went into work very slowly, but I went into the district office. And our teams were out at the operations center. Everybody who could come in from the operations team, the transportations team, and the warehouse team showed up. And I had a chance to go out there, and it was phenomenal to see everybody who was there, because they knew that they were going to do everything that they could possibly do to get kids back in school as soon as possible. This is before we knew what the weather was going to do to us. But one of the things that we were fortunate about was we didn't have any significant damage to our structures. Can't say that to all of the people in the room, but we were fortunate that our schools were relatively undamaged. We had significant tree fall just like everybody else. We had fence lines that were down. We had playgrounds covered with trees. And we were trying to assess that damage and put our plans in place so that we could get our schools open as soon as possible. We have 20 schools and multiple facilities around the district, and we lost power to most of those facilities. We lost communications to most of those facilities. Our technology team, our IT team was working overtime to try and figure out where the breaks were. Was it fiber? Was it with the telecommunications company? What were the issues? And fortunately, with our IT team, they can monitor all of that remotely. And so even when they were at home, they were checking on our schools to figure out where we were. And we oftentimes found out about power outages from our IT department because they get alerts when servers go down. And so they would call and say, okay, we lost another school. And sure enough, we'd send somebody out there and power was out. On January 17th, so we were a couple of days behind, we did also declare an emergency declaration because that allows us, like your agencies, to proceed with work that would otherwise require complexities for us and steps that we don't have the time to do when boards are unable to get out of their driveways. We also convened our incident command team. And when I think about this team and I think about the conversations that we've had over the last 6 years, in 45 minutes, we had our liaison ready to come to the EOC. We had our nutrition services person talking about how we were going to open up respite centers and provide food. We had our instruction department staff looking at the buildings that were open. We were working with SUB to say, okay, we want to get 2 sites open. Are these sites reliable? And they still had power. And so we identified a couple of sites to do that with our ICS team. We had our operations crew set up. We had transportation folks figuring out routes and what we were going to do. And then, honestly, all hell broke loose and things got worse. But in 45 minutes, our team had come together, had the conversations, and when they left, every single person knew what they needed to do. And I knew what my role was in keeping connected with these folks. And I think you and I had a couple of conversations as well. I was working with our board to get updates, to get them to come together. I think a couple of you were Zooming in by phone when we did our emergency meeting because it was the only way we could get folks together and get a quorum to do this emergency declaration. But health and safety was our top priority, and we were going to do everything we could to make sure that we were taking care of that. Because the next piece for us in every single one of these incidents has been care and connection. We have over 9,000 students. We have over 1,500 staff members. We've got a lot of people that we're taking care of on a smaller scale than the community, but these are people that we interact with on a daily basis. And care and connection is hugely important to us. And it's been something that we've done through multiple responses. So that's why when we were able to identify schools that we reasonably believed would maintain power, we identified Springfield High School for our secondary students and their families. And we knew that we needed an elementary school to support elementary students and families. Their needs are different when they come to our facilities. And so we opened these facilities. We provided warmth. We provided multiple meals during the day. And for cell phones, we provided charging stations. We rounded up every kind of charger that we could find. We got power strips out. We plugged them into the wall. And we made sure that anybody who came in had access to resources. And then as the city was developing their response for the community, we were sharing information with our families about how they could also get additional services. One of the unintended consequences of an ice storm like this that we don't think about is we have families who are on SNAP, who receive food assistance, and they lost food. And the mayor called me and said, hey, Todd, we have people who will be down here under the city hall who can meet with any family member who is in this situation and help them get the services that they need. Because they actually had to fill out paperwork. And so we worked on communication. That partnership was really strong, but we focused on that care and connection. We had administrators, teachers, we had volunteers showing up just to make connections with families because that's what they needed. You talked about being at 28 degrees at home alone. This was an opportunity to come and see some other people in a warm space and kind of share, because when we have this shared experience, our strength grows. Which allowed us to really begin looking at community recovery, because at this point we knew schools were out of power. We had a lot of people who were excited actually to get back to school as soon as they could. We had adults who wanted their kids to be back because They needed to go to work, or they needed to take care of the damages that had occurred around their properties as well. So we did everything we possibly could to put our operations team in place to get schools back as soon as possible. We did everything we could to eliminate hazards. We worked with all of our partners to really focus on what we could do to get our schools open as early as we could. And we opened the doors to 17 of our schools on Tuesday, January 23rd to students. We opened them the day before for staff because we wanted staff to be able to come in and see what the environment was going to be like in their schools. It also gave us an opportunity to make sure that we had eyes on all parts of the facilities, because while we had our operations teams going through and inspecting the facilities, you get more eyes in the building, you never know where there's a leak, because the ice backed up water and now it's melting and now it's coming down the wall. So we were able to identify some issues with the help of our staff. Students returned to the other 3 schools on Wednesday, January 24th. And I want to we went out on a limb for that second day, because we still didn't have power at Briggs Middle School at 5 o'clock at night. And we wanted to be able to tell our families they could come back. And I called Jeff, and this guy was swamped, but he got back to me and he said, Todd, our crews are working on that area, and they will not go home tonight until there is power restored to Briggs Middle School. And at about 9:15, we got reports from families cheering in the neighborhood because the power had come back on. And we felt good about that because it meant that our kids could come back to school as soon as possible. That kind of partnership doesn't happen without the collaboration that we have in place. This community partnership is something that, as electeds, you're all working through. You come together a couple times a year, we meet weekly. This has been a shared experience for the 4 of us, and we know that we have a lot of lessons to learn, and communications is one of them. But the communication that we did have was really helpful for me in communicating to our families. Just so you know, typically on a weather event day, we're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning driving roads, and our goal is to get information to families between 5:30 and 6 o'clock, because buses are rolling at 5:45 in the morning. We didn't want to wait until 5 o'clock in the morning to let families know that their kids are coming back to school. So one of our lessons learned was, if there's anything that we can do to communicate to families as soon as possible, we would. And we started setting not a 5 a.m. goal, but a 5 p.m. goal for communicating to families on what was going on. Even if the school wasn't opening, we sent information out to our families. We sent it by text message, we sent it by email, we did phone calls for those that had phone calls. We had everything up on our social media channels on our website. And then our partner agencies did a really good job of amplifying that. And we tried to amplify their messages as well. Because you're right, in a crisis like this, communication is probably one of the greatest challenges we have outside of restoring the power and getting people where they need to go. We still know we missed people, but we also have reports on how many we reached. So we were able to identify where there were some pockets and make sure that folks were sharing information. I'm really proud of this team, and I'm also proud of the Springfield Public Schools team, because we had employees showing up. Oh, you know what? I forgot to do this. Oh, no, you've been doing it. Oh, thanks, Alice. Looking out for me. She got me. We're a kid-based organization, and we had people showing up to do everything they could to get kids back in school who didn't have power at home, who had trees on their own houses. And on the weekends, after we got kids back, we had teams rallying to go help fellow employees be able to take the trees out of their driveways. And it just shows the dedication of not only Springfield Public Schools staff, but this community. We help each other. And I think that's the interest here tonight, is how can we help each other? Because this storm has highlighted the weaknesses. For us, our operations center, where the teams were showing up every day, transportation, the warehouse, it was in a funny little pocket of power, and it didn't get power for 2 weeks. So the place where we were gathering the people to actually do the work didn't have power at the facility. Fortunately, we had a local community member who wheeled in a big semi-trailer generator, and after a couple days, we had power. But it's let us know that in the future, if this is something that we're going to be experiencing, we better darn well make sure we have power to the facility where the people are showing up every day to do the work when schools are still closed. So we're working on that. That's one of our lessons learned. But I want to end my time just reinforcing what Nancy started with. There are 197 school districts in Oregon and 16 regional education service districts, and there isn't a single superintendent that has a relationship like we have here. The fact that I can call the head of the power company and say, hey, when is the middle school going to go live, and actually get a call back, doesn't happen. And I've been in other districts, they don't have those connections. They don't have the same partnerships with the city and the Parks and Rec district to do the work that we're doing in Springfield. So I just want to say thank you to these three because they helped me be successful in supporting our team and helping get our kids back to school. Questions? Yeah, Michael, follow that.
Yeah, do I? Good night, everyone. Mic drop.
I got faith in you, Michael, you can do it.
All right.
Questions? I don't think anybody's got a question.
Well, it's very careful.
Yeah. I asked my Chief Information Officer, Kenny Wygant, to join me. So does Todd work this slot?
Allison. Gotcha.
I'm almost there, hold on.
So that photo or cover shot there means an awful lot to us. I mean, you've already heard about the timeline, you've heard about how all the agencies stepped up for one another, but the moment for me was when Jeff was like, look, I have all these trucks, all these crews. How many crews do we have, or how many trucks do we have?
One people and
Like,
the truck.
like almost, I think, 40 trucks, and they needed a location that was centralized. And it was like, well, if we don't have the power on, nothing's gonna get done here. So anything that the park district could do was, we had 100,000 square foot space, we had all this parking. And I was like, Jeff, here are the keys, do whatever you need to get the power on, and we'll do whatever we can to support you. And it was just so encouraging to see the work behind the effort, because we all saw what was happening on social media and all that, but we saw firsthand the hard work and dedication of the linemen and women that got this back online in an amazing amount of time. I mean, you almost forget how thick the ice was, right? You see some of the pictures up there. So what do we do? So first off, it was pretty easy, initial assessment. We have 47 parks. Most of them were decimated by losing thousands and thousands of trees. So easy call for me to make. We're going to close the district down, but really, how can we support our partners? How can we get the power back on? Our crews, the city crews, helped clear our parking lot so these trucks could get in and out every single day and night for that. We were a site for distribution for water and other supplies. Now, supplies were limited, but we were whatever we could do to help get supplies out to the community, which was really, really important. Amplifying communication, that's one thing that we do very, very well between Brian and Kenny and Elise and Meredith at Sub, is sharing information all year round, but especially during times of need and crisis like this, it was essential that we were helping get that word out through multiple platforms. Yes, most of them are relying on power to make that happen, so that is something that we're looking at to say, how can we get information out in a non-digital form in the new technology world here. And then what we're able to do is open up like the Adult Activity Center and the Bob Kiefer Center, not as respite centers because we're not equipped for overnight stays, but once we got the power on and some of our generators working, we could provide warmth,
Same thing that Todd mentioned, we had every charger, I think we had every multi-strip that we could possibly find in the lobbies. People were coming in, plugging in. We were just giving them any warmth, any comfort, because we were all robbed of the basic essentials, and we're all robbed of our routines. And I think once we get robbed of that, that's when panic sets in. And it really, really, I mean, it was all of us, right? We all serve, all 4 members of Team Springfield serve the same community. That's the people that we work with, or our neighbors, our friends, others, parents, kids, everything. The sooner we can get the power on, the sooner the schools can come back online, the sooner we can get preschools open and give people an opportunity to recreate and take a break and have some mental health from really one of the worst storms. I've lived in 3 different time zones. I've never experienced anything like that. I mean, it was really unbelievable. I personally was out of power for over 12 days. I slept in my office, which was convenient to be near our command base, but just to be able to see what was happening behind the scenes and my staff, you know, we had an inclement weather committee that we put together right before all the ice started hitting, so everyone was kind of like on alert. And staff was just showing up to the Bob Kiefer Center because they knew that help was needed. What job descriptions didn't exist? And so what can we do to help our community? So that was so inspirational to see that. And I get emotional when I just think about it. So then it switched from helping the community, helping sub, helping the school district and the city. Then we had to have all of our parks come back online. And I have to call out, I mean, Eric Adams this year, my director of planning and facilities, Mark Manser, Herculean effort. I cannot believe that they got things open. All of those trails, all of those things, we're still cleaning up some of it, but it was just an amazing thing that the staff was able to do, and something that I'll never forget and forever indebted for. But then as we started looking at recovery efforts, we have the Bob Kiefer Center. It's a 1,000 square foot indoor center. It's not really set up to be a respite center. We had talked for a while about, well, if we had funds available, could it actually become a respite center? So Kenny Wygant and my team, you know, we put together a proposal for an application for a grant that the county wanted to find ways to support, and we were very fortunate to be able to be awarded grant money to convert the Bob Kiefer Center to a true respite center in the future. Now, there's a lot that has to happen. There has to be intergovernmental agreements of how all that's going to happen, but I'm very happy at the prospect of what we're going to be able to do for our community. And I'll let Kenny talk about just some of the specifics of what the Bob Kiefer Center could be for this community as we start planning for the next event that will happen, but we're going to be a hell of a lot better equipped to handle it. Kenny?
So the start for this actually went back, Lane County approached Lane mostly for wildfire respite. So the biggest issue that we've always had, especially with Bob Kiefer Center, is that our HVAC system does a great job of doing air circulation, and actually it pulls air in from the outside, which is great during normal times. During smoky times, we're actually sucking in toxic air, and so we even have to shut down in regular time. So we presented that as an obstacle or a barrier to Lane County. So we were talking about this with wildfire. After the ice storm, it really kind of exacerbated the issue a little bit more. So we partnered with Lane County. Tressa, who's here, and Mert and I were the 3 who kind of like worked with them. We identified the biggest barriers that we had for the Bob Kiefer Center to be a respite center. The 4 things that we knew we needed a new HVAC system to cover our multi-purpose sports drain. We've been in Bob Kiefer Center. It's that big kind of multi-purpose area the rock wall is. We needed a full service generator, so in times of power loss, that was the big thing that really came out of the ice storm, is that was a big piece. We needed new flooring, because right now the flooring that we have in that is not something that is sanitary enough so we can swap in and swap out. And then we need some locker room and restroom upgrades in that facility. So the way the grant structured from Lane County, Springfield was selected as one of 6 communities. So there was Cottage Grove, Benita, Oak Ridge, West Eugene, Springfield, and that's where the Bob Kiefer Center is in Florence. So this is it's about a $20 million grant from Lane County. Willamette Lane is roughly about $2 million of that. So that's good news. The one thing, the sobering piece of this, is that we have to enter into a grant agreement and an intergovernmental agreement with Lane County, who's the granting agency, we can't, Lane County, and this is not something where this is anything that Lane County's going slow on this, it's through EPA. They can't enter into negotiations with EPA until January 2025. So that means that Bob Kiefer Center, like Michael said, we can still offer services that we have available for now, but those facility upgrades to the Bob Kiefer Center won't take place until at least after this next winter window is coming up. So I think what's important, and this is where with the Team Springfield partnership that we have, is we now can look at this as a longer term future opportunity for Springfield, but it's something where we can't plan on it this specific year. And Michael and I wanted to clarify that too, because this has been something that's been in the news a little bit. And if anybody's wondering, hey, is it coming online? Is Bob Kiefer Center ready to start housing people? The answer in 2025 is no. But that means that that work is going to be starting. We're looking at it as a place that can have overnight. There will have to be some formal intergovernmental agreement about what constitutes an emergency to the level where Bob Kiefer Center gets activated. But those are the details we're going to start working out as soon as we can when we get that green light from the county.
Thank you. We're really, really proud and happy. And again, this doesn't happen without the support of all of our Team Springfield that would write letters on our behalf, really advocate, like, this is what this community needs. And if you could imagine going through the ice storm of last January, of having that center, although people would just know to be able to go there, it would be a distribution site and all those things, we'd be very, very proud to be able to offer that to Springfield. So, any other questions for us? I know I'm not Todd Hamilton, but I also did hire him as assistant fitness instructor, the head, the head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Yes, yes, Jonathan.
This is a question both to you, but also to the city. Is
city handle
is
So Mike, what you're doing is very good. My question is one center enough for Springfield in the event of a disaster?
It's hard to answer that. I mean, probably not, because I mean, Thurston is so different from, Midtown to the Glenwood area. So I think maybe there could be satellite centers, but again, we'll continue to have those conversations with our partners, but that's probably a bigger question for the city.
I mean, that seems to me to be something that we ought to be considering, because people live significant distances away from the Kiefer Center. I guess just off the top of my head, maybe 4 spread around the community.
We also get a lot of, for especially wildfire, there've been a lot of requests from agencies who are also outside of Springfield, up like Walterville, upriver too, and they're looking at Springfield as kind of their closest location. The one positive for that is that the way the county structured this grant is that there's the 6 communities coming together. So ideally, might not be enough for just Springfield, but at least it's not the only new respite hub that's coming online. So hopefully outlying areas won't absorb everything in the Springfield.
There'll be 6 within Lane County.
Yeah.
Can we use FEMA money for another microphone?
We'll add that to the list.
Okay, it'll be here in 4 years.
Are there any more questions? All right, before we ramp up, I guess the one question I would love to hear, your guys' perspective from as CAOs, emergencies are difficult for elected officials, right? Most of the time we're, involved in everything. We're from a policy perspective, right? Like we always feel like we're at the center of that work. So as we go into this next winter storm, right, could one of you maybe talk to us about what our role should be as elected officials when there's a declared emergency and what we're supposed to be doing to assist and support the community?
Nancy, tackle that with me. She's very good at keeping us safe. I'm gonna untangle myself from the table. So I'm gonna use, my brain is a little bifurcated because before coming to the city, I worked in counties for 20 years, and counties are generally the emergency management authority for the area, and they're the ones that coordinate disaster declarations up to the governor. So once the county coordinates that, then cities typically fall under that structure. So bear that in mind. As elected officials, one of the most important things that you can do, first of all, if an emergency rises to the level
of a declaration is knowing that you will be asked to come together at some point to declare that emergency. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be imminent. We can put something together quickly with our attorneys, but you have to ratify that as elected officials. That is your primary role in an emergency. The other part is to use the incident command structure. I can't stress that enough. So rather than, routing people to different individuals, really routing them through this room that we're in right now, the Emergency Operations Center, and using that structure. So there is opportunities when we talk about incident command. If we were to activate, say we have the Cascadia event, which we know is a real certainty in the Pacific Northwest, that would mean that the county would be activated, we would be activated, and we would all have different areas inside of this room that all had different roles. There's purchasing, there's logistics, there's communications, and there's an overall incident command structure that guides all of that. In that event, we have daily communications among each other. There's situation reports that we do, and they also can have more than one during the day, depending on the severity of the event. So you at least have one a day where you come in, usually two, depending at a minimum, because you usually will run a 24-hour shift. So in the county that I worked in, we would do, like the county administrator would do 12 hours, I do the other 12, or something like, that's how we set up. And so you designate a time that you will be giving your next communication update. All of the partners know that. The media knows that, and so everybody knows. If you'll recall the Holiday Farm Fire, when the Department of Forestry was running that event, we knew that at a certain time, they would be giving the next situation status report. And that's when people could come, and I remember Councilor Kishneri, you were there at almost every single one. So, there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes. So that's thing one. Thing two is just to help people stay calm, help people really can check on their neighbors, things of that nature. I am almost hesitant to say this, but one of the hardest things that happens in emergency is not necessarily the event, but people that have good intentions and come to where the event is happening with stuff to help, and then it kind of becomes its own thing to manage. So that's where you get an agency like the Red Cross coming in as a partner, and they can help you sort through that, or you can do donations or other things like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think the last thing would be, I would encourage every elected official to take incident command training, and that's something that we can look at in the city as well, so that you're familiar with the different roles and where you fit in that structure, because it's very specific, it's very delineated, and so we all know in the city where our roles will be, and we go out and we will do those roles in an event. So everything gets sped up in the process, but we all have very defined and clear roles. So part of that is your role is conveying that we're gonna be okay. Right? Because when people are in an emergency, the last thing we want to do is throw a lot of numbers at them. They are in their limbic system and they need to know that they're okay, they're safe, and there's a plan. The other part is when we're not in an emergency situation, keeping that level of awareness about preparedness is critical. So that's a message that I think all of us can improve upon, is just individual household preparedness. And I think people have various skill levels depending on their knowledge and their ability. I mean, we have a lot of outdoorsy people in this area. They may have a lot of gear. I don't camp, but I do prepare. So, I know like Councilor Doyle is a very prepared person. So she would be somebody I would call upon, Councilor Missionary. So, use those natural strengths that you have that you might use in other applications, like when you're out hunting or fishing. Those are the same type of skill sets you'll be using in emergency management: stockpile water, medication, foods, and there's great resources available for how to pack a go kit, how to pack your own kit for yourself, for your pets, all of that. My third lesson learned that I've through emergency management is we often don't think about pets in emergencies. That's a critical component. One of the best ways we can work together is just simply by doing emergency management exercises together. Sometimes you do at a site exercise, sometimes you do a tabletop exercise like we're doing in this room. In Clackamas County, we did an exercise at the fairgrounds around how do we shelter people with animals. We had people literally bringing in animals and we were simulating an event where people had to bring their animals in because it's a huge livestock county. Things like that, where we're actually practicing together for these events. And that's where people like Ken, that's his training, that's his profession. It's a whole industry that we can tap into. So that's anything, other questions?
Just to piggyback, I think that was a great summary. I just want to highlight for subs board, sub operates maybe a little bit differently than the other agencies. So we issued the emergency declaration. That is an internal process. In terms of getting eligible funding, at the time, we didn't know that there was going to be an emergency declaration for the county and then up to the state and then the federal government. One thing I appreciate about the sub board, they've always been this way, is the message is essentially whatever it takes. So I had the authority to spend whatever it took to get mutual aid to Springfield. I knew it was going to cost a lot of money. I assumed we were going to get an emergency declaration, but wasn't a certainty. But the board support and the elected support to have the resources needed for the community, because that was a big lift. That's $7.5 million or so of mutual aid, and we're going to get some of that money back probably a few years from now. But thank you. Yes, but that elected support for us to be able to deploy resources needed for the community is so important. So I want to thank you for that. So before we adjourn, I just wanted to thank everybody who went over, but I thought this was a fantastic conversation and I really appreciate it. And also for the administrative officials. The story and level of compassion and dedication that I think our agencies have to this community is really important. And I want to just make sure that you hear us say that we appreciate the response that all the public employees had, top to bottom, as we worked our way through the ice storm, because we couldn't have done it without your employees. And so thank you, and please express our appreciation on behalf of the elected officials. With that, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the city council.
Well, Lane Board is adjourned.
Springfield School Board is adjourned.
Yes. Sub board is adjourned.
And we'll bring 2 microphones the next time and a gavel. Thank you, everybody.